As the world celebrates the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem, our Marine Conservation Group will share more with you about this rare, spectacular, and valuable ecosystem to understand the threats it faces, why conservation efforts matter, and what you can do to help. Our first speaker is Miss Lisa Lim. So she's an educator and a nature guide. She has been an active advocate for outdoor and nature learning. And our second speaker for today is Mr. Chua Sik Chuang, who is a marine biologist and as well as a nature guide. He has a passion in coral reef conservation and holds a master degree in marine affairs and ecology. I'll pass the time over to them for them to introduce themselves and to get on with the sharing. All right.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, very glad to be able to do this. Okay, now, today, myself and Sik Chuang, my name is Lisa, as May have already introduced us. Okay, so myself and Sik Chuang, thank you for allowing us to actually share this fascinating habitat, mangrove forest with us. So it's a very interesting, unique, valuable ecosystem that can be found on the boundary between land and sea. So it's really, truly very unique. I always tell people mangrove forest, unlike our tropical rainforest, it's not easy to fall in love at first sight. But only when you slowly get to slowly understand it and appreciate it more, you will actually find and see the beauty of it, because the first impression always is muddy, it's smelly, but it's actually not so true. Yes, it's true, yes, but you will understand more. All right. So yes, today is also a very special day for us to do this. Today is actually the International Day for the Conservation of the marine ecosystem, mangrove ecosystem. Now, this is actually adopted by UNESCO in 2015, and every year on the 26th of July, we celebrate this day. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to talk about. Okay, Nature Society. Okay, Nature Society is actually a very brief history on Nature Society. Sik Chuang, can I have the next slide, please? The Nature Society is actually one of the oldest NGO in Singapore, non-government organization in Singapore. So it was actually started in 1940 as a Malayan Nature Society, MNS, yes. Then after that, in 1991, in 1954, then we have got a Singapore branch. So it was called Malaysian Nature Society Singapore branch. Then in 1991, it's split. So after it split, right, in 1992, we have to be independent, and then we have the so-called the new society is born, the Nature Society Singapore, stand alone by itself. And that is where in 1992, we have got our new logo. And if you notice, the logo is actually a mangrove tree. So why mangrove? So on the slide already, it actually kind of explained because it's very resilient. So guess what? This is what we are actually going to want to be like this mangrove tree. Very, very adaptive, very resilient. Okay, so now I'm going to start talking about mangrove. Now, like I say, it's not really a place or an habitat that you can easily fall in love at first sight. But then what happened is that, do you know that that we can actually find a lot of things? In fact, a lot of the thing around us, food especially. I think Singaporean, the best thing is to share food. Now, okay, this. Now, the food. Sorry, Sik Chuang, can, okay, okay, now you see all this food that's on the table. So, sorry, I you didn't get the slide correct. After this, the next one. Yeah. Okay, so, Sik
Where
Chuang,
is it?
please. Oh, it's okay. No worry then. Yeah, because I think some. Okay, no worry. Yeah, he didn't get the slide on. Okay, we have what we'll call, gong gong, tilapia. If I can show you the slide that I have prepared, I think y'all will it's really a feast. Okay, our mud crab, our cockles, everything. Oh, actually, all these are found in the mangrove, including even food like our atapsi, you eat your chendol and your fruits, for example, durian, our favorite durian. Okay, all these are actually found in this really muddy habitat. Anyway, so now what is mangrove forest? Okay, mangroves are actually very hardy. They are very adaptive. Okay, they are real, what I call real survival. Okay, survival when I say because their roots, okay, when submerged in water, mangrove plants are still able to thrive in this salty condition, wet condition, which if other plant, they probably would have killed or already be killed, because if I were to put, not just any species can actually live in this same condition as mangrove. So because first they have, then how do they survive? All these things, right, they have special adaptation, which later on I will hand over this to Sichuan. Sichuan is going to share to you, with you about more of this. And Singapore, by the way, we have got 21 major mangrove species recorded. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over this to Sichuan, and then Sichuan is going to just share with you all the importance or the benefits of our mangrove ecosystem. All right, Sichuan, over to you.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Chuan. As I was introduced, I am a marine biologist. I don't actually specialize in any particular ecosystem, although I kind of developed a liking for some of the coastal ecosystems, such as the mangroves and seagrasses.
Hold on.
Before I go on.
Yes, I need to do the screen thing first for you.
Okay. We're going to do a quick swap on screens.
Sichuan, you just continue. I will get the screen thing sorted out for you.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing mine.
Yes, you have to stop sharing yours.
Okay, so while the screen sharing is going to resume soon, I feel that mangroves are very underrated ecosystem, because there's a lot of stuff that happens along the coastline, of which mangroves are quite important. They have a great deal of benefits, but people have always regarded mangroves in a very negative manner. So where can we find the mangroves? Do we have the slides? Lisa?
Lisa, if you can look at the bar below, there's the share screen point.
Sorry, just go on first.
Okay. All right, so the mangroves, while this is going on, so where can we find mangroves in the world? The slide will come up soon, and the global distribution of mangroves is very similar to global distribution of another major marine ecosystem. And most of the mangroves tend to be found in the tropics and up into the subtropics. So the highest and lowest latitudes are about 20 degrees north of the equator and 20 degrees south of the equator. And in between all that is where we have most of all the mangroves. And like the other marine ecosystem, the coral reefs, the hot spot is Southeast Asia. So where we have the coral triangle in Southeast Asia, we also have effectively the mangrove triangle as well. And it's all centered around Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, going down as far south as the northern coast of Australia, and as far north as getting into Vietnam, Cambodia, large parts of India in the Indian Ocean. The 20 degrees north is the Tropic of Cancer, 20 degrees south is Tropic of Capricorn. Beyond that, you get sort of subtropical, you get mangrove habitats happening there too, but they tend to be slightly less biodiversity. Moving on, how are we doing, Lisa? Moving on, concentrating on Singapore. Now, in Singapore, we did have quite a bit of mangroves. So if you go back to the 1950s, the mangrove distribution up to the 1950s was quite significant. And this is before all the reclamation took place. Having said that, there was a great deal of agriculture already happening up to that time. And mangroves were slowly getting degraded because of increased human habitation and the slow increase in development of Singapore, which basically accelerated after the independence. So between the late 60s up to what we have now, Singapore has seen a great deal of urban redevelopment. And the picture that you see okay, Lisa, are you done? The picture that you will be seeing, where it shows the mangrove distribution into 1950, and the next slide, which shows the mangrove distribution around the time of 2012. There is a big difference. And you'll see the green patches virtually disappear until all that we have left today is just a few green patches along the northern coast, some of the green patches in Ubin and a few around Tekong. And Tekong bears special mention because it is restricted to public access because it's the army training zone, which means that there's a few mangrove species there that are no longer found on mainland Singapore. So it's effectively our last holdout on some of the more important mangrove species that we used to find in Singapore. Okay. In terms of numbers, mangroves used to cover about 13% of the total land area of Singapore. And this is including the other types of forests that we find in Singapore. That has been drastically reduced to now less than 1%. So we're talking about 0.5% of total land area now in Singapore, which has rail mangrove in it. In these areas, where we can find these mangroves are places like Sungai Buloh Wetland Preserve, Pasir Ris, which is one of the areas that is slowly beginning to come back. Then there's Hantu, there is Pulau Ubin, and of course Pulau Tekong. Our landfill site to the south in Pulau Semakau has fairly decent mangroves, and because when part of the original mangrove ecosystem was reclaimed over to make way for the landfill site, one of the positive outlooks of that was that the mangroves were replanted in a different part of what is now called the Semakau landfill site. So we're still trying to do our best in looking after mangroves. All right. if it's okay with people, I think I will do the sharing. Okay, so this is the 1950s distribution. This is 2012, and you can see quite significant reduction in mangroves. The interesting thing about this particular map is that it also shows some of the other marine and intertidal habitats, so the seagrasses that we have in Singapore, which are arguably just as important. Now, mangroves are a fairly hard environment to live in. It's very low in oxygen. The sediment the soil is very soft, which means that anything that tries to grow there has a hard time growing. And it's unusual in terms of a forest in that it gets submerged, it gets inundated in Singapore twice a day with the high tide. So the seawater comes in twice a day. In other parts of the world, you get mangroves that are submerged once a day, but that's a tidal effect. The thing is that it does get submerged. Now, you do have to ask yourself, why do the trees and the mangroves go back into the sea? It doesn't make sense because most of the time plants cannot survive salt water. So one of the reasons why plants go back to the sea, which includes the mangroves as well as seagrasses, is to escape competition on land. Everything is fighting for the same set of resources. In terms of plants, they are fighting for oxygen, they are fighting for water. So mangroves have gone back to the sea and have basically acquired a set of adaptations that allows these particular plants to survive best in saltwater conditions. I will be talking about that in a while, but what plants and animals face in the mangroves, there's a high temperature because of sunlight, there is saltwater conditions, very low oxygen in the soil. So all of these plants have various ways and means to try and adapt to these types of environmental factors. In the science, when people are studying this, they look at two different factors that affect the environment. One is known as abiotic, which is physical factors. So physical factors would include sunlight, temperature, water, and various other things. Biotic, which is biological factors, would include things like predation, predation on animals by other animals, predation on plants by animals, and other types of biological factors as well. The pictures that you see here, which is courtesy of Lisa Lim and other contributors in Nature Society, are all of the mangroves in Singapore. So what you're looking at is pictures taken from Sungai Buloh, pictures taken from Ubin and from Hantu. So at high tide, you can see the tide comes up quite far up. Now, because of the effect of the moon on our planets, you get variations in tides. So you get high tides and low tides. So at high tide, the highest high tides, the water comes up quite far, and it does flood a significant part of the mangrove habitat. At low tide, the water can go all the way out, as you can see here. Now, all of this means that the plants undergo in Singapore twice a day very, very wet conditions and then fairly dry conditions. Regardless of that fact, everything is salty there. So the plants go through various ways of trying to get their nutrients, trying to get their water somehow. Now, how do the mangrove plants get fresh water? Well, they've got various ways and means. So anaerobic mud. By the way, the word anaerobic means very low in oxygen or no oxygen. So how does mangrove survive in conditions like this? One of the ways that they get fresh water is from the seawater, but the seawater has a high level of salt in it. Okay. So what they do is that there are mechanisms that mangroves employ to get rid of the salt. One of the ways is that they've got special cells that excrete the salt directly onto the leaves. Other types of mangroves accumulate salts into their leaves, which then drop off carrying the excess salt with them. They have ways and means to conserve the water within them. So they have very thick leaves, which are known as succulent leaves. They have waxy coatings on their leaves as well, which allows water conservation. It limits evaporation of water from the leaves, all right? And then to get the oxygen, they have different types of roots that allow the plants to get oxygen directly from the air itself, because the seawater and the mud tends to be very low in oxygen. To deal with the soft substrate, these plants have to have roots that enable it to anchor quite strongly to the soft mud so that it doesn't fall over. They show themselves in different ways. So some trees, for example, the trees over here, they have props or stilts that come out from the side of the trunk and form a network of roots that basically holds the tree steady. You get buttress roots happening, which you can also see in tropical rainforests. And basically these extend the footprint of the tree so again, it doesn't fall over. Then you have these special roots called pneumatophores. And pneumatophores are roots that allow the plant to access oxygen directly through the air. Some of them, like these ones with leaf roots, as well as conical and to a degree the pencil roots, have special cells that open up directly. So they act a bit like our noses, the nostrils of our noses, and they allow air right into the plant. So their function, these special cells called lenticels, their only function is to allow air passage in and out of the plant. So they have very efficient filtration systems to allow water in and to get rid of the excess salt. Their filtration systems also prevent excess water loss. Then because when the water goes in and out, when the plants want to reproduce and propagate themselves, they go through a tough time because if you drop your seeds in when it's high tide, the seeds will float out. So if the seeds don't get a chance to root in, then the plant will eventually die off because these plants will then eventually have no more babies. So they go through a process called vivipary, which essentially each of these fruits are like a miniature plant nestled within the fruit itself. And once they hit the ground, they hit it running and they germinate fairly quickly. So if any of you have tried to grow plants in your house and you know how long that takes, and typically it takes a month or maybe more. Mangroves have to condense all that growth into days and weeks. So when a mangrove seed hits the ground, so you have these seeds called propagules, and once they hit the ground, they penetrate the soft mud, and then they start to germinate very quickly. So the roots will come out, the leaves will come out, and this generally happens within a few weeks, so that they get a chance to root in, and then they don't get washed away in the next high tide. What happens though when these plants drop during high tide? Well, they've got special flotation mechanisms which allow them to float, depending on the species, up to about a month in the water before they reach a place where they can successfully germinate. Again, it's a bit hit and miss. If they don't find a proper place to germinate, they do die off. But enough sort of manage to come to rest on nearest patch of ground where they start to germinate quite successfully. So these spear-like propagules, they don't often land sticking down like a spear. Some of them land on the side, which really doesn't matter because the roots will come out of one side and the leaves will come out of the top here, and they will start to grow fairly quickly. Now, for these particular ones here, where you see that sort of brown bulb at the top, that brown bulb acts a bit like a life jacket. It helps the seed to float so that the seed doesn't sink too quickly. So all of these are part of the mechanisms and adaptations that the plants have acquired to allow the plant the best chance of survival. And this is what Darwin means when he says survival of the fittest. One of my pet peeves is the use of the word fit. Fit doesn't mean physically fit, like you exercise all the day. In this case, the word fit means the best suited for survival. The next two slides that you see, these are brochures that you can get on paper as well as online. These brochures were made by one of our good friends of Nature Society. His name is Prof. John Yong. And he distributed this and the other side of it so that you can identify plants from the leaves and from the seeds, and different types of seeds as well. And these can be downloaded, and if you want to know where, we can provide the link for that later. So fauna and flora, what can you find in mangroves? So what kinds of animals, what types of plants? We've mostly done with the plants, but for the animals, there are a variety of different types of animals. Singapore, one of the big predators that we have back in Singapore are the crocodiles, and I'm quite happy to see them. I'd be happier if there were a bit more, and hopefully they'll keep people out of the mangroves where they don't belong. But you get typical mangrove species like the mud skippers, so many different types of crabs, tree climbing crabs, crabs that burrow into the mangroves. We even have a special type of crustacean that forms large mounds in mangroves called the mangrove mud lobster. And these are becoming quite important indicator species for the health of the mangrove, because the more mud lobsters you have, generally the better health of the mangroves. Besides the crocodiles, you have the water monitors, and you get some snakes lurking around, like the dog-faced water snake. We also have things like the mangrove pit vipers. And we have all different kinds of birds that wade in and around the mud flats looking for snails and worms and small crabs and small snails. And that's how they feed. Now, one of our visitors that we had the beginning of this year and the end of last year is the one right in the middle of this picture. It's the Asian openbill. And they stayed in Singapore for a long time because they were quite happily feeding all the stuff in Singapore. So if you get a chance to visit Pulau Ubin, which is specifically a wetlands reserve, it's actually globally important because it's one of the feedstocks for the annual migration for the birds which start all the way from Siberia and then end up all the way down in Australia and New Zealand and back again. And during migratory season, all types of birds can be seen, from the biggest to the smallest. Other types of animals, of course, we have a variety of insects and spiders. One of the animals that is not shown here are the bats. And in the past, the mangroves have been important roosting grounds for some of the largest bats we have in the world, the Malayan flying fox, which is, okay, me being Singaporean and having grown up in Singapore and Malaysia, I would probably argue with the Australians out there who are listening that our bats are arguably the biggest in the world, but I know the Australians have something to say over there. So let it be a happy argument. We do get stingrays in there, the mangrove whipray that you see there. Unfortunately, because we've lost so much mangrove habitat, they're not as easily seen anymore. It does mean that you do have to be careful when you tread in mangroves, but you have to be careful anyway, because when you're stepping around mangroves, the habitat, it is quite fragile. And finally, one of the more recent appearances that we have on the lower left of this slide are our otters. And they are beginning to come back. So the otters are, well, they're happily ottering around. In Singapore, they have learned to make the urban habitat their own as well, much to the annoyance of some people with their Japanese carp. All right, what I'm going to try to do is to play this, and I hope it can. Oh, can't. Never mind. Some of the plants that we can see, we have one of the globally critically endangered plants known as the Hoya. So that's on the right-hand side of the screen, plus a bit to the center. The Hoya is, it's a very pretty set of flowers. And this particular Hoya is found in the mangroves, so it is a mangrove associate. You get other species of mangroves in the tropical rainforest as well. They are typically found with, I'm not sure how to describe this, like a ball of flower. It's like florets in a ball shape. And once they start blooming, they are quite pretty. You do have to spot them very well because they're not terribly big. They would be about the size, I guess, of a small chocolate chip cookie in diameter. And then one of the fruits that we have that is used in Southeast Asian cuisine is it's the fruit from the nipa palm or the atap palm. The atap provides us with the leaf fronds, which is used in the past for roofing material, so atap roofs and atap huts. But the seeds are used in ais kacang and in cendol, and they are this translucent jelly bean shape, which is known as atap chi. Then we have a variety of different types of flowers, and again, some of sorry about that. Some of the flowers can be very, very colorful and very pretty, like the Lunditsera on the top left-hand side. And some of the fruits can be quite large, like these very globular-looking round fruits from the Xylocarpus. Conservation of mangroves, moving along fairly quickly. So I give Lisa a chance. Now, mangroves are very important to us in terms of where they are and how they benefit the land as well as human beings. So the benefits are very important. It is an ecosystem that actually interacts with other ecosystems in the marine environment. So there is actually an interaction between mangrove habitats and other marine habitats such as seagrass habitats and coral reefs. Mangroves are usually found near river mouths, and one of the important functions they do is they act as a filtration system for the rivers coming out, so that a lot of the heavy nutrients get absorbed by the mangroves before they shoot out into the sea. Without the mangroves, all the sedimentation and the nutrients go out into the sea and they cause algal blooms, which can choke and cause marine life to die off. So they help by absorbing a fair amount of the nutrients coming out before the rest of it heads out into sea. And by consolidating the nutrients and binding them around the roots, the sediment, it prevents sediment from going out and suffocating the coral reefs. Likewise, reefs actually help to protect the coastal habitats by taking a lot of the energy away from the waves before it reaches the intertidal as well as the coastal and mangrove habitats, which further then removes the remaining energy left so that it protects the land. So it prevents very large-scale erosion to the land. It helps to build up the land, so it acts like a natural reclaiming agent for the land. Right. Okay, so this basically talks about this also shows what I mentioned before. They do provide habitats for important, commercially important fish that we eat, as well as commercially important shellfish. So when you eat your chili crab, for example, when you eat your cockles, the blood cockles, the sea hum, a lot of them are found in mangroves. A lot of the fish grow up in around the mangroves before they go out back into either the open sea or to coral reefs. Even sharks get protection within the root system of mangrove trees, because bigger fish eat smaller sharks. And I've actually seen that happen. Mangrove ecosystems, now, apart from helping with our food security and helping with our our water filtration and coastal protection, so they are extremely beneficial for the fisheries, for water, for coastal protection. They also provide a raw material such as wood. In the past, wood from mangroves have been very sought after because they are very hardy. Some of them are very dense wood, so they're used in construction. In Southeast Asia, one of the main uses of mangrove wood is actually charcoal. So when you're doing your barbecue, chances are that the charcoal that you use have come from one of the mangrove trees. It is very important in one of today's big issues, and this is climate change. Now, in a minute. Mangroves have been found to store as much carbon as a tropical rainforest. There are scientists that argue that they may store, they may act as a bigger carbon sink as tropical rainforests. I don't want to have any disputes here. Both ecosystems, terrestrial rainforests and mangrove forests, are equally important in terms of carbon sequestration. The thing is, if we don't have any of the forests to help to store the carbon for us in their ecosystem, our climate will basically go through drastic changes and not for the better. For example, in terms of numbers now, around 3 to 6 billion metric tons of carbon is stored in the forests, both both mangroves and tropical rainforests. So this is very important. And what happens when we lose this forest? All the carbon escapes back into the atmosphere, and this will cause major climate change, which we are seeing the effects of right now. And one of the key things, of course, everybody knows is global warming, which leads to rising sea levels. This is important for island nations in Southeast Asia as well as the rest of the world. And because Singapore is mostly sea level, any rise in sea level is going to directly affect Singapore as a nation. Threats to mangroves. Major threats are urban redevelopment in Singapore, as well as other parts of the world. Most of the mangroves are not deemed important because there is an overlying impression that mangroves are not that, they don't seem to hold that much importance. Much of the mangroves have, well, not a very nice smell. So people have equated in the past with bad smell means higher disease levels, which leads to certain disease being called bad air. In Italian, this is trivia, by the way. In Italian, air is aria, bad or sick means mal. So you put those words together, you get a certain disease that we now know actually is the chief vector is mosquitoes, and this is malaria. So logging, some of the big threats are logging because we use the wood, and uncontrolled logging is a big deal. Culture of the land for fish farming and for aquaculture, because when you do aquaculture of things like fish and prawns, it happens best along the coastline. So they destroy mangroves for that. Unfortunately, once that land is no longer useful because the fertility has gone down and the nutrient levels have dropped, that land is full of waste products as well as salts, so it's effectively poisoned for more than 10 years. Once we get rid of the mangroves, it means that the nutrients and the sediment that used to be trapped by the mangroves are now going straight out into the sea, which leads to eutrophication, which is basically overabundance of nutrients, which means you get algal blooms and red tides. Sedimentation means that the marine habitats like the coral reefs and the seagrasses, they get covered and smothered by sediments, which basically leads to bad things going on. And it's a knock-on effect. All right, moving on, impacts to mangroves. Basically, these would be human impacts. And again, I already mentioned most of these. And these would be things like urban redevelopment in places like Singapore, logging in quite a few places in Southeast Asia. If you visit places in Indonesia and Malaysia, you can actually see large kilns, large ovens, where they turn mangrove wood into charcoal, which is then again goes into our barbecues and all that. Because of these, we get increase in erosion because the land is no longer held by the coastal vegetation. So we begin to lose land. And we try and fix these things by creating artificial barriers, things like seawalls, which is not so good. We also change the way that currents behave because once they take these away, we see an edge effect happening. So more and more land gets taken away. All right. So moving on from here, I will be passing this back to Lisa now, if Lisa is ready to go. And this is what can you do? What can people do? And what can volunteer organizations like the Marine Conservation Group, which is part of Nature Society, do? How can you be involved? And how can you join your activities? All right, Lisa?
Hi, I'm back. Okay, So I guess thank you, Sitran. Thank you so much. Well, if like I'm sure that some of you have actually already know some of all this information, but for those who are new, I'm sure I hope that today this session, Sitran have give you a uh, very quick summarize and overview of like all this thing, and oh, I hope it's not information overload. Anyway, now I'm going to do the fun part. Okay, now so what MCG do? Okay, so Marine Conservation Group. Okay, we have got some ongoing project. But then today, because we just want to, and then also time is running a little bit, short right now. I'm just going to give a very quick one. Mangrove related activity. For now, we have one of the ongoing one since 2015. Okay, 2016. Sorry, yeah, is actually this the Restore Ubin Mangrove, which is, I think some of you may already heard of it, R.U.M. Okay, so it sounds like some very intoxicating, but it's actually not. It's actually R.U.M stand for Restore Ubin Mangrove. So this project, how we so-called how Nature Society is involved. Okay, basically this project is called is led by Professor Dan Fries from the Mangrove Lab, NUS Geography Department. Okay, so he lead this project. So, and then of course there are a few key so-called a few key partners. Okay, so one of the partner of course is our MCG, the Marine Conservation Group, and then we have got so basically our role is coming in to do outreach. So we help involved in outreach, and then some also related activity which I'm going to share later. And also we have another key partner which is actually the Sea Angel. Okay, they of course they are the people from Ubin. So Sea Angel is actually made out of started by the Ubin fish farmers. The guy is Philip, and then of course we have WA Singapore, Ria Tan, who actually involved in running a lot of training workshops and also doing a lot of outreach. Okay, and of course lastly, of course, MPark, who actually managed Pulau Ubin. So due to this, what you call it, the current situation, so a lot of all this project whatsoever, all this activity has been put on hold. But up to end of last year, we was Marine MCG was carrying out like monthly cleanup. We were involved in May, can I have the next slide, please? Then, okay, so this is basically what we all do. So we do a lot of outreach like this. Okay, next. Okay, so this Restore Ubin Mangrove. So what is it so special? It is special because it's not restoring mangrove just by literally like planting, you know. So it's something different. EMR. So what does EMR stand for? It stands for ecological mangrove restoration. So basically, we want the whole project is to allow this mangrove to actually restore naturally. Okay, I will not go to so-called I will not go into details of this because we hope to actually get on the people from the Mangrove Lab to actually have one session with us, and they have already agreed. So yes, yeah, we will definitely let you all know when is it. So basically, this is it work with the mangrove elevation and hydrology, and then to naturally improve the restoration process. So we don't need physical work to go and plant them. All right. So EMR also allow us to produce a self-sustaining wetland ecosystem. That means everything is natural. Okay. So before we do this, so what are the things that we have to do? So next. Okay. So we have got a few of the staff activity that we were involved. Okay. So it started with Dan team of his research assistant, and I have the opportunity to actually went around with them to actually get to be involved in all this mapping and survey and all the things. So it looks like quite fun, you know, with all these total station, but actually not really. Next, yeah. we were in condition like that, muddy, so literally mud. So we were like working in mud day in, day out. So so it was a few months of project that to do all this elevation thing. So this one, it just take only a few months. Then after that, okay, so what are MCG volunteer involved? Okay, next. Okay, MCG volunteer, we involved in biodiversity survey. We do also like monthly cleanup. So this is what we do. Okay, so we gather a group of volunteers from our nature societies, and then then we will actually go on to, because some of the area is actually inaccessible just by like through walking. So we actually have to go on kayak, and then you see here we all brief about like what we are supposed to do, and then we go in. Okay, next. So so things like that. So I'm with our so-called our chart, and then we will go around, and then we actually record down what are the various species also, or even some of the fauna that we spotted. We just take notes of all the things. All right, come. So this one was a very short. You all just do in the initial part, but what was the ongoing that we ran through for a few years was this. Okay, our monthly cleanup at the mangrove site. So we have got 2 designated sites. One is at Puaka, Sungai Puaka, also in Obing, and then one is at, near to Kampong Durian. So this is what we do every month. I have I will have like 20 to 30 or sometimes even 40 of very enthusiastic volunteers who will go with me to this mangrove area and clean up the place. We need to prepare the site before restoration takes place. All right. Okay. So next. So then see, here are some of the other activities that also volunteer can be involved. Okay, so we do outreach. So during like Pesta Ubin for this one, so we will actually share about mangrove. We will talk about the all this the benefit, like what the Sikchuan have already shared, and then all the food, and then we have even mangrove walk. So we have guides, volunteer guides there to actually help. So this is what we can do. So if for now, sadly, is that because a lot of activity are put on hold. But once situation get better, when we have a lot of activity comes in, we definitely hope to see a lot more people coming to join us to actually help us in all this thing, all this survey, all this cleanup, and even doing outreach. All right. Okay, but if you are not into really volunteering, it's okay. We still have other way to enjoy your so-called mangrove. Next. Okay, so you can just join us simply just to enjoy. Okay, don't have to be volunteer. So Nature Society, we actually organize a very frequent so-called kayaking trip around all the mangroves in Singapore. So we have Khatib Bongsu, Mandai Mangrove, Pulau Ubin Mangrove. So these are some of the so-called activities that we actually bring up to the people to say that, okay, you want to enjoy mangrove, look at this. This is so beautiful, right? Yeah. So it's like people after kayaking with us, they will see mangrove in a different light, okay? So the next few photos will actually share also some of the really interesting trip that we bring. But for now, this kayaking trip also the same thing is temporarily put on hold for a while until I'm sure, okay, one of our fellow members and also a very avid volunteer with Nature Society, Se Chong, he is actually the one that's organizing all this thing. And I'm sure, I think he's somewhere inside here also listening. Yes, so he probably missed going onto the water. Yes, but we hope that one day when this whole situation, the COVID situation get better, we will have trip coming up. And yes, you guys can look up for the all this activity on Nature Society website or our social media Facebook page. Beautiful, right? Yes, yeah, and every year on an annual basis, okay, there's this Pesta Ubin, celebrating Ubin. We also, MCG also will organize this once a year, the ever popular mangrove kayaking during the Pesta Ubin. But this year also the same thing have to be put on hold. So we are not sure how the thing is coming up, but we will see. Yeah, but if there is anything, don't worry, our Facebook, social media will definitely make this big announcement. All right. So yes, thank you everyone. So if you are keen to be our volunteers, if you really love things marine, you like your mangrove, please come and join us. Okay, be it as a volunteer or be it just to join us in one of our activity. Just check out our Nature Society, the website, or the Facebook or the Instagram. All right. So we open up for, we just have like maybe 5 minutes just to take a couple of questions. Let's see. I will over to Mei to, yeah, they will pick up the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sek-chan. Thank you, Lisa, for all your insightful sharing. I'm sure our audience learned a lot today. So I think we have received quite a number of questions. So Felicia and I have been looking through it. So maybe Felicia, you can bring up one question first for either of our speakers for today to answer.
Thanks, May. Thank you, Sek-chan and Lisa, for that very informative talk. I think everybody was very interested in all the information, and lots of questions are coming in. So we'll start with a simple one first. Someone asked us if there might be a difference between primary mangroves and secondary mangroves. Will the secondary mangroves have the same kind of biodiversity?
It's okay. Unfortunately, mangroves are not quite like a terrestrial forest where you have a primary forest and a secondary forest. Mangroves are, I guess the equivalent of a primary mangrove would be the ones that would be very much less disturbed. Once you have disturbance in the mangroves, what you tend to lose is the biodiversity. So you will lose out on a lot of different number of species of trees and, well, plants and animals. The limiting factor for most of the mangroves is actually how much land they have. So if they don't have enough land, you don't get the biological diversity available to an old growth mangrove. So if we take Singapore as an example, you could equate that to a secondary growth type because there are not that many species and they tend to grow in a very narrow fringe. And if you compare that with an old growth mangrove, which has significantly larger land area, you get more biological diversity. But I need to qualify that because even Singapore, where the mangroves have been reduced to 0.5% out from 13%, there is still more biodiversity in Singapore than you can find in more or less pristine mangrove that you can, that maybe in somewhere like the Caribbean. So it's a bit of a challenging question to answer, but it's a good question. I hope that answered that.
Thanks, Sek-chan. We'll go on to some other questions because there are heaps of questions. Could you explain perhaps what the importance of mangroves are in preventing destruction when there are tsunamis?
Okay. If a tsunami does hit a mangrove, tsunamis are basically large waves that have a lot of energy in them. And these types of waves are pretty much unstoppable. But if you have natural growth like mangroves and other coastal vegetation, and if they're old growth, that means they're firmly rooted to the ground, what will happen is that they will remove most of the energy of the waves. They will rob the wave of energy. So I wish I could have this slide. It's somewhere in my store. There is, actually, if you can Google this later on your own, there's a good slide that shows an area that has mangroves and an area that has no mangroves before and after the tsunami. And the area that has the mangroves showed significantly less destruction at the back of the mangroves, to the landward side of the mangroves, whereas the area that did not have mangroves was completely obliterated. So the main effect of the mangroves is just to take the energy away from the waves. Now, do remember that mangroves are not this only ecosystem around in the sea. So if you have a marine ecosystem like a shallow reef, the tsunami has to go over that first. And when you go over something shallow, that already takes away quite a lot of energy from the waves. The remaining energy from the waves then has to go through the mangroves, and that takes away even more of that energy. So in that way, it basically just kind of robs the energy away from the waves. Again, I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Sichuan. We'll go on to something a bit lighter. Someone's asked if you met any dangerous creatures while moving about in the mangroves, like crocodiles. Maybe Lisa, you want to share?
Yes, I can take this. All right. Okay. Dangerous creature. Yes. In fact, anywhere, even trekking in a rainforest, we will still have dangerous creature like snake and all the snakes. Now, the thing is that we have to be very aware ourselves, like whenever we are. For example, Sichuan shared earlier, like the mangrove ray, which is actually like if you were to walk in the mangrove, just be careful. But due to habitat loss, we are losing all this. We have not seen many lately. But that particular weed ray was taken by me when I was in Pulau Hantu. So it was around the Pulau Hantu mangrove area that I took that the mangrove weed ray photos. So yes, but in Singapore, I mean, back in the main, so-called our main island here, I have not seen one other than the crocodiles in Sungai Buloh. Well, that one, I think a lot of people seen them. So, well, it's a nature reserve. You don't go into the water, so you are pretty safe as long as you stay on the boardwalk. Yeah. So if you're talking about, say, dangerous, well, not exactly. I wouldn't say it's dangerous. Like I say, anywhere is dangerous. Yeah. So just be careful where we are treading, and then if you're in the water, just watch your step. Just be careful. So yeah. So I hope answer your questions. Yes. Firefly. Okay. I saw this. This question was so the next one is about firefly. Oh, I have seen fireflies in Pasir Ris Mangrove. So yes, you can go there and check it out.
Can I just add on to the firefly?
Yes.
The fireflies tend to congregate around a specific species of mangrove trees, and because we've lost a lot of our mangrove trees, we may have lost that particular species. So the fireflies don't come to us anymore. But like Lisa said, the best place for fireflies right now is Pasir Ris.
Okay, that's great. We move on to another question, a good one. How would changes in temperature and climate affect the state of mangrove forests?
That, I guess that would be like how it affects everything else. If it gets too hot, mangroves don't survive very well. If the sea levels rise too high, and the mangroves tend to be flooded too often, they will either die off or they will do what sensible ecosystems do, they will migrate. So if the sea levels rise up slowly enough, we'll get the mangroves migrating further and further inland. Unfortunately for the mangroves in Singapore, further and further inland means into HDB flats. So we do have a bit of a problem there. Basically, we will see loss of habitat, and that is the danger.
Hey, thanks very much. Perhaps we'll take one last question before we wrap up, because I know we are way behind time. Someone did raise a very good question, and we might not have lots of time to answer this. but I think they'd like to know how, as a society, we can create more awareness about the importance of mangroves, especially about development issues and how that may encroach into our mangroves.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
So how can we as a society create substantial awareness of mangroves to convince people about the importance of them, including the government?
Yeah.
Okay, there are people here who are listening who probably have a better handle of it than I do.
Yeah.
The best way to get people aware is to bring them to the place, let them see it, get them to enjoy it. So those slides that Lisa had of people kayaking in the mangroves, that to me, that's actually one of the best ways to get people out into the mangroves and have a look at it. To make the government aware, I would dare say that our current government actually is aware.
Yes.
But they have certain challenges that they have to meet, both socially and politically. So we have to be a bit careful treading once we're sort of getting in touch with the government, because we can't afford to be too forward or too confrontational. But going back to the people, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because we want more people to go and see these things. So see the mangroves, see the forest, see the coral reefs. But on the danger side of that is that we get too many people there, and we risk degrading the environment that we actually want them to be aware about. So we have to find a balance, and we have to make the people socially aware of the environment as well. So they have to know that they're actually enjoying this, but they also have to know that at some point, if you step over a certain invisible line, that enjoyment could become dangerous to the environment. I think more can be said about that, but yeah, this is probably not the time for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Sichuan. Yeah, I totally agree with Sichuan that, you know, we love what we find beautiful, right? So the one way to really see the beauty of a mangrove is to really go out there to enjoy it, to see it, to enjoy it. And then, you know, what we will want to protect what we think is beautiful. So yes, so this is really the message. And of course, really, it's more than just the beauty. It's really a lot of other importance and benefit, you know, that we can actually get and receive from this mangrove forest. It's a very, very unique ecosystem, very, very special habitat for us to enjoy, and it's actually helping us. So yes, we will still be taking a question via email, okay, because it's already like 5 something. So yes, so thank you everyone for joining us today. Just take down our email address if you have any other address, any other question for us to address. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sek Chang. Thank you, Lisa, again, once again, for sharing with us. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We hope you learned a lot. Like what Lisa has said, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them an email at what's shown on the screen right now. And for those of you who are interested to find out more about activities by the Marine Conservation Group, please feel free to go to NSS website. You just have to visit www.nss.org.sg, go under our events and calendar. So they will have activities once a few months or every month as well. Another way to find out more about us is our Facebook page and our Facebook group. So just search for Nature Society Singapore. Now, a little bit on Nature Society Singapore. We are a non-government, non-profit organization. So if you're interested to support us in our nature advocacy and conservation work, please do consider becoming our member. So annual membership $40 per person. You can also find out more about our membership and donation on our website. So that's all from us today. Once again, thank you very much, everyone. We hope to see you at our talk next month. Okay, so look out for more details on our events and calendar. Thank you.